Good evening, this is your host Dan Stafford with Midwestern Geek and Cali YouTube channel, formerly a podcast, and this is episode 102, and I've got a lot of interesting stuff to talk about tonight. We're going to kind of have three focuses tonight. The two main ones are going to be computer tech and space. And then the third one's going to be a little bit of a follow-up, minor follow-up on Australia, but a kind of cool one. So that'll be at the end. And we're going to get into the computer tech stuff first. So I'm going to go ahead and flip over to the infinity screen here. Infinity screen. And we'll get on that right away. Alright, so let's go here, and let me put my readers on here, and let's stop by the website for a minute, MidwesternGeekandCali.blogspot.com. You can get here just by punching in MidwesternGeekandCali.com, and you can also find us on Twitter at MidwestGeekCali, also on Facebook, the Midwestern Geek and Cali discussion group. And I'm going to go back and talk just a little bit about one of the things that we covered back in episode 100, I believe it was, what you need to know about the Australia brush fires. You can always go back and check that out on the website for more background. And also keep in mind you can find all of our online presence over here to the right hand side under the geek links at MidwesternGeekandCali.com. So let's go ahead and get into our first story of the evening. Google plans to kill support for third-party cookies that track you all over the internet. Now, this is kind of a little bit of a tricky thing. A little sip on the coffee there, Geek Fuel. And cookies can do a couple of different things. One of them good, one of them not so good. So basically, what a cookie is it's a file, kind of similar to a text file, that a website hands your browser. Like if you're using Google Chrome, or if you're using, God forbid, Internet Explorer. That thing is ancient, don't touch it unless you absolutely have to. Firefox, Edge, Opera, whatever the browser is that you're using, it'll have some kind of a folder somewhere in its install folder on your hard drive, and it'll take that cookie file from the website. And the first thing that a cookie does that's good is it once you've successfully logged into the website, say it's something like your Gmail, right? And you go and you log into Gmail. Have you ever noticed how you don't have to log into Gmail again unless you don't visit for a couple of weeks, right? If you go the next day or 2 days later on the same computer, you're still logged in, all right? So what that is that's a setting in the cookie file that the website hands your browser, and it's got a timeout number and all that kind of stuff in there. So cookies handle support of persistent login. Okay, so I don't know how Google is going to work this, where if they knock off the ability to use cookies, that you still have persistent login. That to me is a little worrisome with this plan. The other thing that cookies do is have a list of oh, this person went here on the web, then they went there on the web, then they went there on the web, then they went there on the web. And what it does is every time you go to another website, it adds an entry to the cookie that says what website you were at and what stuff you clicked on. That's what they mean by tracking cookies. So really, I think the bottom line is that cookies overall need to be redesigned so that there's only, one function on a cookie. If it's a persistent login cookie, that's all it can do. If it's a tracking cookie, that's all it can do. Now, a deeper dive into cookies might find that maybe they'd have already done that, and I'm just not aware of it. But this idea that Google is going to kill support for cookies, that one, it's interesting to see how this is going to play out. Supposedly they have some kind of workaround that they're planning on doing for it, but Google has a tendency to be very heavy-handed with stuff. They've done it with Flash, they've done it with HTTP websites versus HTTPS. So they've gotten very big company myware the highway with what they do, and this could be one of those things, and it could be great. My apologies, it's one of those nights, so hopefully I'm not too bad on that. Okay, so that's one story, and as always, all these articles will be linked in the show notes for the episode over on the blog. So it's going to be episode 102, and let's see here. No, we don't need that, Tom. Thank you. So Tom's guide, they're talking about hundreds of millions of cable modems could be hacked due to the cable haunt flaw. Okay, I haven't really read this one in depth, but this is concerning to me because cable modems are something your cable company controls. You don't, generally. This is the little box that goes in your closet or on the floor by your desk or wherever it may be that converts over the internet from the signal that goes in on the round cable to the phone cable looking thing that goes to the back of your router or computer. The back either goes to the back of your Wi-Fi router or to your computer or whatever, that allows you to have internet over the cable system. And these boxes are typically owned by the cable company. So if there's a major flaw in a bunch of different models of cable modem, that is a big deal, because everybody and their aunt, uncle, brother, cousin, and son all use cable modems to get online with cable internet. The only people that don't are people who use satellite internet or people who use like dial-up internet, God forbid. Dial-up internet is at best capable of 56K per second. I'm sure there are still instances of dial-up internet out there over old school landlines, but they've got to be few and far between. Probably they'd be in a rural setting. I have to think about that for a minute. So this is an article well worth reading. Now, this next pair of articles is pretty interesting. DRAM breakthrough puts us one step closer to instant on PCs. DRAM is dynamic random access memory. That is one of the ways I like to explain this to my IT students at school, at the college. All right, I teach IT to veterans. And let's put it this way. Let me paint a picture in your head of what the RAM memory does in your computer, right? I'm going to try to break this down into a real simple to understand picture for what RAM really does. All right, so picture this. Right, you've got three big components in your computer. You've got the CPU, or central processing unit, which is not the big box on the floor. That's the whole computer, right? The CPU is a pretty large chip that sits on the motherboard inside the computer. And the CPU is kind of like a worker and an office worker back in the 60s and 70s before we had computers. Think back to the days when everything was done on paper with typewriters. There were no computers. You either wrote by hand on paper or you typed on paper, and that's what everyone used to keep records and to send messages and all that. Now, back then on your desk, a lot of office workers would have folders full of paper files sitting on their desk. Right? They would also, over in the other room, have a big file cabinet, and in that file cabinet there would be a special drawer, probably somewhere in the top drawer, a special hanging file called the paging file. We'll get to that in a minute. So you can kind of think of the CPU as the office worker. He's the one that's like the brains of the outfit as far as getting the work done for this little office. And you can think of the RAM chips as like the office worker's desktop. This is where the office worker puts the files. All right, and if he's working on a file right now, it's generally going to be the one right in front of him. But if, say, he gets a call from his boss, and the boss says, well, there's this customer, and they're kind of upset right now. They've got a bit of a problem. They're stressed out. They need some help because they've got something that needs to be taken care of fairly urgently. So I need you to kind of set aside what you're doing and help this customer out. And so the office worker, the CPU, looks on his desktop, the RAM chips, and he says, oh, that customer's file is just like right over here on my desk, so I'll just take the one that's right in front of me that I'm working on and swap it with that, and boom, I'm up and running. I'm working on the customer's service and helping them straighten this problem out. Maybe pick up the phone and call them and get to work on it. And then, say maybe about an hour later, he gets a call from the CEO of the company. And the CEO of the company says to him, Mr. Office Worker, I have our biggest customer calling me on my other line, and they're really freaking out right now, and they're going to leave us if we don't help them with their problem, like immediately, right now. I need you to drop everything, even what your boss told you to work on, and I need you to get on top of helping this customer out right now. And so, of course, the CPU says, sure, Mr. CEO, yes, I'll do that, and I'll get right on top of it. And the CPU, he looks around on his desk on the RAM chips, and no, that customer file is not there right now at all. It's not on his desk. So what he does is he grabs the thing on his desk that's being least worked on, that it hasn't had to work on it in a while, it's kind of lower priority, and grabs that file and takes it and goes over to the other room, to the filing cabinet, the hard drive, right? He goes into the hard drive filing cabinet there, and he takes that folder because he knows he's going to have to work on it again pretty soon, and he puts it in that special hanging file at the top called the paging file, so that he can get right back to it. He knows exactly where it is when he needs to pick it up again, because odds are, a few hours from now he's going to have to get that file back and work on it. Then he goes digging through the rest of the file cabinet to find the file for the customer that the CEO is calling about that needs to be worked on right now. Finally, he digs through and he finds the correct file. Then he, runs back over to his desk, the RAM chips, and sets that file for that real important customer like right in front of him. Takes the one he was working on, sets it where the one he went and stuck in the file cabinet had been sitting, because he doesn't have any desk space left, right? And now he's able to get up and working on that. Now, it's a lot slower process to run over to the hard drive / file cabinet in the other room than it is just to reach for something on your desktop, i.e. the RAM chips. So the RAM chips are like the desktop, the work area, the work surface, where they put what they're working on right now. And this is why having a bigger desk is going to make things faster, because you got less running over to the file cabinet to do. All right, so that's what RAM chips do. They kind of act like the work surface or desktop for the CPU. Now, this DRAM stuff is basically the type of technology that the RAM chips use. But the thing about RAM chips is, number one, they need a constant little bit of refresh of power in order to keep the information in them. Otherwise, it needs, if they didn't get a refresh of power every few microseconds, then they would lose the information in them. Because here's what happens with the RAM chips that we have in computers today. As soon as the power shut off, all the information in the RAM chips just evaporates. Poof, it's gone. No power, no information stored in the RAM chips. This is why things have got to be saved over onto the hard drive before you shut the computer down. You got to stick it in the file cabinet, because when the guy leaves for the night and he shuts the light switch off, the maintenance crew comes in and takes everything off the desk and stuffs it on top of the file cabinet every single night. As soon as the lights go out, the information leaves the desk. That's the way RAM currently works. Well, these RAM chips that they're talking about, they don't lose the information when the power goes off. They retain it. Even without power, they're more like a hard drive is in terms of keeping the information when the power's off, but they're super fast like RAM chips. So this is coming down the pipe in the future. And when they do, if the RAM chips are able to keep the information in them, that means when you start the computer, Windows can already be in the RAM chips and running. Because here's what happens when the computer starts up now. Since there's no information in the RAM chips, when the computer's actually running, there's a copy of Windows that are sitting on the desk that's running, and that's what makes the whole computer work, right? Everything the CPU can't can't interpret any of the. You can think of Windows like the grand interpreter book for how to read all these files. Without the Windows running in the RAM chips or on the desktop, you wouldn't be able to read the files because they're all in different languages. Okay? So here's the thing. When the power goes out, that copy of Windows that's running there in the RAM chips goes poof right now. But if these chips come onto market, that's not going to be the case. There can be a copy of Windows running in the RAM chips, and as soon as you turn the PC on, it's already there and wherever it left off the last time it was being used. That's a big deal for RAM chips. So let's hope they actually come up with this. And this next story is basically another one that talks about the exact same thing. It's a little bit different take on it. But they're saying scientists may have discovered universal memory or DRAM replacement, and it's along the same lines. This is a little bit deeper dive into how these new chips work and function. But basically it's the same thing. RAM chips that are super fast like today's RAM, but don't lose their information when the power's off like today's RAM does. So that's a pretty big deal. Alright, a little sip off the Geek fuel here, and we'll go over to the next one. Alright, Signal Update makes it easier to keep track of files and storage regardless of encryption. Alright, this is an interesting one, but Signal is a communications application that does the same thing that your text messaging app does on your phone, except for if both people on either end of a text message are both using Signal, then that message gets encrypted between the two ends. And here's the difference between, like, WhatsApp does kind of the same thing, but here's the thing. Signal is an open source project that's designed with privacy in mind by volunteers. WhatsApp is a proprietary application that's owned by private corporations, and obviously the private corporations' interests are going to come first, even though it has an encryption built in end-to-end. But the thing with either one of them is you have to have the same messaging application on both ends for encryption to happen. And basically encryption just means your messages between you and the other end are encoded so that nobody else can read them. Alright, why is that important? And I'm going to get into this in another episode, probably next week or the week after. But I've got a bunch of stories along these lines about the encryption issue and why it's a big deal to have encrypted text messaging. And it's not all this, oh, the government's reading my stuff. That isn't what it's about. It's more about hackers reading your stuff in between. So expect an episode, probably 103 or 104, coming up on devoted to text messaging and why it's important to encrypt your information end-to-end when you're doing text messaging. But this is a minor improvement in Signal that lets you keep track of how much the attachments that you get in text messages on Signal are using on your phone as far as storage and where they're at, so that you can either get to them easily or get rid of them easily to free up storage on your phone. So this is a nice little article on that issue, on the storage issue, not on the encryption part. And I encourage you, if you're using Signal, to go take a look. And if you're not using Signal, well, take a look at that that episode when I get it out. It'll be coming soon. All right. So now we're going to skip out of the technology stuff, and we're gonna head into space. All right. Let's go play Rocket Man, and I don't mean the little guy over in North Korea. I mean, you know, more like the sci-fi Rocket Man, or what used to be sci-fi. All right. So first things first, let's dump this ad. Goodbye. And then this is on CNN. There are other stories around on this same thing, but for right now I'm going to go with this one. It's got a pretty good explanation of what they think these are. Strange objects found near the Milky Way's supermassive black hole at the middle of the Milky Way. Alright, so basically they're saying that these objects are large, either really giant stars or gas clouds that seem to behave like stars, and they orbit the big black hole in the middle of the galaxy, and as they get near it, they get kind of all stretched out and tweaked. It's a pretty interesting article, and it's pretty cool. Nothing really profound as far as physics go, and nothing profound as far as it affects your daily life. But it is interesting and fascinating, the weird stuff that happens in physics. One of the other things that gets a mention in this article that I really like is how much busier the middle of the galaxy is than it is way out here out on one of the rims like we are. A lot more stars, a lot more crowded, a lot more gas and dust clouds, a lot more flying debris floating around out there, and an awful lot more radiation. Kind of the best place to see the middle of a galaxy from is from way out on the edge, because if you want to be in there, it's like yeah, it's like trying to take a taxi in a third world country. There's just way too much traffic without any control, and add in radiation, lots and lots of radiation. So it's pretty and interesting to watch from a great distance. All right, but this is a pretty cool article, and I recommend it. So I'll have that linked over on the show. So now let's get into another one that's kind of fascinating. How the tiny exoplanet-hunting ASTERIA satellite showed scientists what CubeSats can do. All right, so CubeSat, let's talk about this for a second. We're talking about a satellite that's kind of the size of a shoebox. Not much bigger than a shoebox, like you got your sneakers in. All right, this thing is little. But what's cool about it is it's really inexpensive to put up. They can put a pretty good camera in it. And what this ASTERIA did was figure out how to reliably point a small telescope in one of these satellites straight at a star that we're interested in studying for a long period of time without like blurring it or getting off track or not, like skewing to the side and not getting a good focus on it. So lots and lots of these little telescope CubeSats can keep a long-term eyeball on the same star or couple of stars over a period of 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 years, and they're really cheap to put up. So this is really coming out with some interesting science. They did a proof of concept with ASTERIA to be able to prove that they could do this in the first place, and they set it to looking at some pretty well-known stars so that they would know that the data that they were getting from this thing was quite valid. Yeah, because it's like doing practice questions where you already have the answers, so you know that if the way you're doing the question is getting you the right answer. And so apparently it went really well, and then after about 2 years or so they lost communications with this little CubeSat. But it opens up the door for a lot more of them. So next up, we're going to get a little SpaceX-y here. The earthly limit on satellite ambitions. All right, here they're talking about how satellite internet, all these big constellations of satellites that they're talking about using for internet, like OneWeb and the whatever the one is that Amazon's founder is planning on doing, and some of the other ones. There's a limited number of relay stations on the ground available to talk to these satellite networks. Now, here's where I think SpaceX is going to really have an edge. Let me go back over to the blog for a minute here, and I think I covered this idea in episode 101. Yes, this article right here, how Elon Musk's UFO on a stick devices may turn SpaceX internet subscribers into the Starlink satellite network's secret weapon. This is over in episode 101, the electric blacksmith and electric Hummer and Windows terminal and SuperNet. It's in that episode. So if you hit the blog, you'll be able to find it. But here's the scoop, right? With only so many relay stations on the ground, it might become that the ground stations are a bottleneck for these big, ginormous satellite internet networks. Now, Elon Musk and SpaceX, their satellites are at not the ones that they're putting up right now, but by next year they're planning on putting lasers on the satellites so that the satellites can talk to each other directly in space. That's one thing, which dramatically decreases the need to rely on ground stations at all, and not to mention which laser light travels at the speed of light in a vacuum. It travels about half that in glass fibers. All right. So again, fiber networks would be about half as fast at transmitting data as the satellites would with direct laser communications in space. Then on top of it, there's an analyst who's been looking at what SpaceX is doing, and he's pretty sure that the ground stations, the little receivers that we'll all use to get the internet from the SpaceX satellite network, the Starlink network, will be able to relay information from satellite to satellite and still take care of our network connection too. So it'd be like having thousands to even millions of little ground stations to relay data from one satellite to the next, which also is going to be faster than fiber because it's still radio in a vacuum, basically, just through a little bit of atmosphere, but a lot closer to a vacuum than glass is. And these connections are straight line, whereas fiber has to go around earthly obstacles. So if what I think is going to happen with SpaceX and their network is really going to happen, then they're going to have a leg up on these other satellite networks because they won't be forced to rely on ground stations. The only network that I'm aware of right now that's in planning to have direct laser communications from satellite to satellite is the Starlink network by SpaceX. So they may have an out, and they may have a way around this issue that the other networks won't. So these companies, they tend to build the satellites because they're flashier. They're everybody's fascinated with those and the part of it that's in space. But what they don't think about is the lot less sexy but very necessary infrastructure on the ground to support these networks. So they're going to need to build out the ground networks if they're not going to have direct satellite to satellite communications in space. Big deal on how these networks are going to actually operate and how much they're going to have to be invested in. I think it'll be it'll be a bit of a game changer there in that whole satellite internet game. Now, that being said, let's get off the satellite internet and on to something else Elon Musk is up to. Elon Musk drops details for SpaceX Mars mega colony. They're saying, SpaceX is saying they want to put 1 million people on Mars by 2050. All right, we're talking within 30 years. This is a big freaking deal. They're wanting to get these Starliner spaceships up, and every couple of years when the Earth and Mars are at their closest point in orbit, start sending 30 ships with, they basically want to send 100,000 people to Mars every 2 years. That's a big deal. You're not talking small colony stuff here, and you're talking a lot of ships, which really leads me into the next article. which is along the same lines and basically on the same subject. All right, you're talking these starliners. Let me see if I can get rid of that thing. Maybe, yeah, maybe not. No. All right, let's back up here. Unfortunately, I can't get rid of the banner at the top for you. So anyway, they're talking about having these starliners in operation for 20 to 30 years at a crack. These are supposed to be reusable rockets. This is a big deal. If he can pull this off and make these reusable for that length of time, more like an airliner than like your typical rocket that goes up once and poof, it's done, then it may well be feasible for him to put 100,000 people up on Mars every 2 years. This is a big deal. Also, keep in mind these same large rockets are going to be reusable. Large rockets are going to be used to put up the Starlink satellite internet network and maintain it, and probably would be involved in setting up satellite relays between Mars and Earth for internet communications between the two worlds. This is huge. This is a really big deal and a really cool story. You can't say Elon Musk doesn't think big. That's for sure. He definitely thinks in a large scale. And we honestly, having a vision like that is necessary. Now, I'm going to put flat out there, we could be getting hammered with space rocks at any point in time. Right now, all of our eggs are in one basket on Earth. Really having a large, strong, robust colony on another planet gives us some insurance of survival as a species over what happened to the dinosaurs. So I'm really liking this whole thing with SpaceX and the Mars colony stuff. I think it's necessary. I also think we should be establishing a very strong colony on the moon. I think that's a big deal because the moon is right next door. It's like 2 or 3 days away, not several months away. And we should be putting a pretty large colony on the moon as well. And also quite a few electromagnetic launchers on the moon. I think what NASA is currently planning with returning to the moon permanently is a big deal and important in and of itself. So a couple of big things happening in getting humans to be an interplanetary species rather than a single planet bound species. That is really important for the long-term survival of the human race. So just saying, this is a great article in that direction and one you definitely should go check out. So last space article of the evening is a rather fun one. NASA on mushrooms. Yep, NASA wants to grow a moon base out of mushrooms. They're talking about growing mushrooms into the shape of a moon base and then hardening it into bricks with radiation. This is fascinating. I guess maybe mushrooms will grow anywhere. This is a really fun, cool article. And I definitely encourage you to go over and check it out. It's on futurism.com. Again, it'll be linked in the show notes. So go over and take a peek, and I guess there'll be magic mushrooms in space. That sounds pretty cool. Now, from there, we're going to go over and do a little bit of a follow-up on the bushfires in Australia. So let's head there. Prehistoric trees in Australia saved from wildfires in secret mission. All right, so there is a type of pine tree in Australia called the Wollemi pine. It's like one of the original pine trees. It's an ancient breed of pine tree, and there are only 200 or 300 of them left in the world, and they're only found in this one place. They even keep the location of where these trees actually are secret so that they don't get overrun with visitors and wiped out. So apparently the firefighters went on a secret mission to go and save these pine trees, and I think that's pretty cool. So a little ray of sunshine there. Also, I'm hearing that rain has helped wipe out about 30 of the bushfires. So some good news for Australia there. I hope our friends down under get some relief from the rest of those fires really soon. We've got U.S. firefighters, even from here in the state of California, that have gone down to help with those. And I hope you folks down there, down under, that you get some relief from those fires soon. Best wishes to you as always. So, on that note, I'm going to wind it up and let's call it an evening. And thank you everyone for watching. And let's say, why don't I flip over to the Twitter profile for a minute so you can see what that looks like. And there we are on Twitter at MidwestGeek-Cali. And you can find our shows and links to the episodes and everything there. Welcome you to follow us on Twitter. Even more importantly, if you would hit the subscribe button over on YouTube and subscribe to the Midwestern Geek and Cali podcast. We're a little small channel right now, and we could definitely use more subscribers. So I would totally appreciate it if you would take a little bit of time and do that. Visit us on Twitter. Hit us up on Facebook if you're over there. Subscribe to the YouTube channel. Any of those things help and help keep me doing this. So hopefully you found everything interesting tonight. And thank you for watching Midwestern Geek and Cali. It's greatly appreciated. And on that note, I'm going to say happy Vulcan fingers to you from the Agent of 42. And may there never be a rogue wave in your coffee mug. And thank you for watching the YouTube video.